I think a lot of people are like, let's all pretend like you're going to be at this one company for your whole life, even though that's not the world we live in. I try to be more realistic. I try to say, I think you're fantastic. Let's say you're a manager. I want to get you to that skill set of being a director, and I'm going to help you get there, whether we have an opening or not.
Welcome to Tools for Tech Leaders, a podcast for C-suite executives and tech decision makers who are excited to connect with peers and thought leaders sharing ideas, frameworks, and tools that resonate and are useful. I'm your host, Ian Tian, CEO and co-founder of Mattermost, and today we're thrilled to be joined by Becky Center. Becky is the former CEO of Indiegogo, a platform that empowers people to unite around ideas and bring them to life through crowdfunding and innovative projects in design, tech, and other fields. Her career path includes leadership roles at Healthjoy and Groupon, where she served as general manager of Groupon Coupons and chief of staff to the CEO. After beginning her career in the real estate and finance function at Scion Group, Center holds degrees from Tulane University and Stanford University, where we first met. She lives in Chicago with her two children, and I'm so glad to have her on the show today. Becky, welcome.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's been, oh my gosh, it's been so long since we were in grad school together. And you look the same. You look great. So that's a good thing.
I feel the same way, but it has been a while. And I think we've stayed the same age, but I do remember you had a newborn, guessing the newborn age, even though, we didn't.
Oh yeah. She's like 14 now, which is crazy. Just tells me how long it was in school. And I have a 10-year-old, and a 14-year-old. And I think like, if you ever watched like Inside Out, the 10-year-old is like Inside Out and the 14-year-old is like Inside Out 2, right? So it's like,
I
they're
love
just
it.
full of emotions.
Such a good movie and like resonates so much. So I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they love the movie, but they're still like, they don't quite get it that those are all the things happening inside of them yet. But they kind of like wear their emotions on their sleeve. They verbalize it all still, which is really fun for me.
Yeah, it's wow, teenage girls. It's just such it's really amazing. Just so engaged, yeah, all the time.
I'm sure.
So I love to learn about Indiegogo. I mean, I've been a fan of crowdfunding for a long time. I'm into comic books, and I see, there's a number of comic books projects that are on there, a lot of electronics. I got my nomadic backpack off of Indiegogo, which is a great travel backpack.
I love to know that you're a fan, and I'd love to tell you a little bit about it. First off, for those who don't know, I'll maybe take even a step further back and talk about crowdfunding. So Indiegogo, really the first crowdfunding company over 15 years ago. And at that time, the idea for crowdfunding might be what people now think of today as equity crowdfunding, meaning you actually would, pool money together and be an owner in an idea or a project. Back at that time, that was not possible due to legislation. And so we, Indiegogo, I'm not the original founder, but the founders came up with the idea of what's called perks-based crowdfunding, meaning you can't have an actual investment or monetary, claim or reward to crowdfunding, but you can have a little bit of a perk or a thank you. So Indiegogo started in film, and someone would have an idea for a type of film they wanted to make. The film industry, really even more so before, at this time had a few key gateholders, and they kind of decided what stories would be told and what films would be made. So Indiegogo is very mission driven. We said, if someone with an interesting story to tell, if they have enough backers, enough people that care and want to contribute to it, they can make that film. And then the thank you would be, maybe I would send you a DVD of the film at the end of the day. Maybe if you contributed more, you'd actually get to be an extra in the film, or you'd get to come to a premiere or be a producer. And so there would be different perks, different thank yous. And that's how the idea got started, perks-based crowdfunding. And that's what we still do today. We've expanded outside of film, like you said, comics, books, art, and creative pursuits, as well as a lot of like physical products. So we have a really big, almost D2C type of business where people have ideas for products like the backpack you mentioned, e-bikes, a lot of eco-friendly gear, a lot of kind of niche enthusiast items that maybe bigger companies are not going to go out and make. Someone has a great idea for a thing that they're really passionate about, and they go out and say, hey, do enough people believe in this? Do you guys want to see me make it? And if they get the funds to be able to go off and make it, at the end, the thank you or the reward is the actual product once it's made. So that's a little bit about Indiegogo and crowdfunding.
Yeah, I totally love the model. And it's so great to be able to connect sort of commerce and creatives and tech and put it all together and unlock more creativity than there would be in the world without that. So just as a high level, like what's the scale of Indiegogo? Like how many projects have you done? What countries are you in? Just kind of curious on how big it is.
We are global. We're in every country that you can be in. You can create a project from anywhere, and you can back a project from anywhere. And so we have Some limitations sometimes based on just like the rails we run on and how we can accept certain payment systems. But really, like the creativity and the idea can come from anywhere. We're completely global. We've launched millions of projects and millions of backers. I mean, we're really kind of a household name at this point. Everywhere I go, if I wear my t-shirt, people come up to me and they say, like you did, oh my God, I remember, this project that I backed on Indiegogo was really meaningful to me. Or the really cool thing is I'll have other people say, hey, I actually launched something, especially when I was in college, when I was just getting started, and that helped me have a career of entrepreneurism, which has happened to me. I've met people like that now so many times over. And that's really cool and special about what we do.
I'd love to learn a little bit more about your journey from an executive over to being first-time CEO. I think it's a transition a lot of executives are thinking about. Super curious, like what are the areas where you felt like, yeah, I'm prepared, I got that down, I know how to do this piece. And what are the areas as sort of first-time CEO you're thinking of sort of, hey, these are growth areas, things you got to pick up as you're going through your journey?
I think as an executive and with my experience, I had a really diverse and interesting career journey where I got to learn and see a lot of different functions that make up a company. So I had experience being in product and engineering. I had experience in marketing. I had experience in sales. I even had experience, with an HR partner, a finance partner, and all of these are part of what goes into being a CEO, of course. But the parts that I really had never experienced is actually sitting and being a part of the board and understanding the board. A lot of things that come to corporate governance or thinking about corporate value and, of course, fundraising, cash balance and runway, sort of these really big, meaty things that you have to think about when you're the CEO. And a lot of that you learn on the job. I think coming into this role, one thing in retrospect that I was kind of nervous about was just the concept of the ultimate accountability, right? Like every decision, everything you do, ultimately, I felt this weight or I was worried it would feel as though a weight was sitting on my shoulders, that I was really responsible for everything. And that was probably the thing I was the most nervous about, more so than an individual skill set or piece of knowledge, which I sort of at that point knew that anything I didn't know I could ask, and you can always ask, or you can hire an expert to help coach you, et cetera. But like that ultimate accountability was different. And I actually found once I got started, what I thought might feel like heavy or like a weight was in some ways really freeing, because I got to make those decisions and I got to live with the results and experience it and really understand that in a new way. And I actually really love that. It's opened up my creativity and my understanding in a really unique way. So I think for those who are thinking about making the leap, I really encourage it. And it's not for everyone. And as you know, and maybe I've had people on the podcast, some people do it and say, not for me, and pivot. And that's true of almost anything, but you don't know till you try. I found that I had a really great support network around me, both my team, my investors, and, former colleagues and the network that were all really like cheerleading and rooting for me and helped me do it. So it's been a wonderful experience.
That's excellent. I think, yeah, having that support network and that sort of like ultimate accountability, yeah, those kind of go hand in hand because they're cheering for you, they're cheering for the whole company. So that makes a lot of sense, really resonates. I'm really curious because you came to this role having been chief of staff before, where you kind of have, the broad sort of visibility in all the things a CEO does, but you maybe don't have that accountability. Do you feel, what's it like to be a chief of staff versus be a CEO? Does that feel like that's the close analogy, or does it feel like more sort of other leadership experiences would prepare you more? Like, what did you get out of your chief of staff experience that would prepare you for that CEO role versus other roles that you had?
The chief of staff experience was life-changing. I got so much out of it. I absolutely recommend that for anyone who's considering as well. I think prior to being a chief of staff, I was truly very functional. And again, I was a math major in college. I was someone who really looked for the right answer, high achiever, but a little more structured, right? And so if you can imagine, and maybe you know this, Ian, I believe you ran product teams and engineering teams. You can run a team and you can run a function and you can be great at that. And truly that's an amazing skill set as well. And so I had done a bit of that. But when I became chief of staff, it was the first time I saw the bigger, a really step back and shift in perspective. Now, at that time, Groupon was like a 12,000 plus person company in, 35 countries operating, really very big. And there was more to it than I understood from where I sat before that role. I also, in the role of chief of staff, I got to spend time thinking about both, being in board meetings and understanding a public company board, which I would have never had exposure to before. I worked on our earnings scripts and got to hear from investors and shareholders, which is a totally different experience. So, and even things like HR and thinking about people, employee satisfaction, leadership training, succession planning, things that go into the mechanics of a big company that you just don't always get to see. So that role really helped prepare me. And then to be able to go into a CEO role. So I would say a combination of chief of staff, which gave me just sort of the mechanics of running a company, being a general manager in between those two, where I was ultimately really responsible for a P&L. I think that maybe earlier in my career, I thought I was responsible for a P&L, but then I had a sales team and I knew what it really was to have a quota, and to feel that pressure, which is different. And you have to know what that feels like. So I think there were little bits from every role and every experience I had that culminated together into, the very holistic job of CEO.
That's excellent. Yeah, I think that, carrying a bag, carrying a quota, being chief of staff at a public company, those are all experiences that can really sort of extend, how you think about the world. Is there, if you kind of boil it down, you're thinking about like, hey, a future CEO and whatever career they're going to have. For a future CEO, like what would you think about as advice from your experience at a public company, at Groupon as chief of staff? Like what would you, what are sort of one or two takeaways that are just sort of ideas for other people, other execs to think about that you learned in that role?
I think that especially in a big public company where there tend to be a lot of opportunities. And maybe I was really lucky that Groupon was such a fast growing company and just had a ton of career advancement opportunities. And I look at the alumni from there and they're all off doing really amazing things. I think in that type of environment, one, cream rises to the top. And so just like putting your all in every day creates more opportunity for you, like just doing your best. It just happens. You get more opportunity. Two, I think taking a little bit of risk, meaning trying a role that you don't know if you're going to be great at and learning from it and getting yourself a little bit outside of your comfort zone, with every new thing you do. And then, maybe the balance of understanding tech product and sales and marketing. I think kind of being able to have a little bit of both is pretty helpful if you're trying to go. I think a lot of times what ends up holding people back from making it to a general manager or a CEO role will be they have one but not the other. And then I would say the network is important and just meeting people and, keeping in touch, which a lot of us, I think, especially when you're at a larger company, you feel really comfortable inside the walls of your office. You don't always go outside of them. So pushing yourself a little bit to build that network is really helpful as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm just kind of wondering, is there like a Groupon mafia? Like, what are some of the things from Groupon hyperscale public company? Like, where do people go and what sort of roles do they have after? I'm just super curious.
There absolutely is. So I think I keep in touch with a lot of Groupon alums. They're just wonderful people. A lot of them I've hired or been hired by or worked with or consulted with. People from Groupon went on to be leadership at DoorDash, Affirm, Lyft. People have started their own companies and gone on to do really amazing things. So we kind of have a great alumni network the cool thing about Groupon was really massive scale combined with, I use this term lovingly, an immature company. It's not as established as a Microsoft, right? It really was a short in tenure company, a very young in number of years open, right? And so got massive scale so quickly. And the culture at Groupon was one in which like trial by fire, try it, do it, go, like, take risks, learn, try something and scale it and see what happens. And so it breeded a really interesting culture of people who are very creative and innovative and willing to try and almost like never satisfied. And so people have gone on to do like really phenomenal, interesting things. I would say I've probably at this point, I know of 5 or 6 former Groupon GMs who are all CEOs of companies now. Like almost every one of them, I think, has gone on now to do that kind of a role.
That's awesome. That's like, yeah, I think that sort of pedigree of being able to run into GM, running in a high performance culture, fast growing culture is such an asset to have and it feels like you would want to hire a CEO with those kind of experiences to bring those to life at other companies. One of the things you and I were discussing, during a little earlier was the concept of like, well, for me, and for me and other CEOs, there's been this kind of like I'd almost call it like a ZERP era malaise, right? Where there's like low interest rates, tons of capital, and you'd hire people, and it's like everyone wanted to be a manager. And if they weren't a manager in like 2 seconds, they'd leave to the next company. It was so hard to hire people. And what's that caused in a few companies that I've seen, and certainly in parts of my company, is that there's a little bit of sleepiness. There's a little bit of like, well, if I don't have like an exorbitant amount of resources, I really can't do very much. That was the old days, and we kind of missed the old days, and that was how we would do estimates and things like that. And I'm just kind of curious, like, Groupon being such a high velocity environment, how do you think about sort of other environments, and how do you kind of bring that kind of energy with you as a CEO, as someone who's been experienced and seen that? How do you bring that culture with you?
It's a great question. And I do think a lot of us are dealing with that right now. I think that's the macro trend, a lot in there. So I would say, yeah, when I kind of made that transition and I started at Indiegogo, which we are feeling what you're feeling. Interest rates have gone up. There's just things that are different now, right? The environment is different now than it was also when the company was brand new, and when you start out and you're a hot startup, growing, promotion. You're hitching your career on a rocket ship, and then you become a little bit of a more established company, and you're maybe moving a little slowly. So I'd say there's really two things that you're talking about here. One is maybe like employee expectations and how they think about their careers and wanting, like you said, maybe the promotion or to be a manager or to move their careers very, very quickly at a time when those opportunities aren't always as available or as aligned with what the company needs. And the second one is, how do we kind of reinvigorate a sleepy company? And I think those are both really interesting concepts. So maybe I'll take one at a time. So maybe we could talk about employees. So I think that it's really interesting because I know sometimes I feel hypocritical because I know I benefited from that time when employee growth was go, promote. And I was able to go from, being like a manager to a director to a VP to a GM, like very, very quickly. And so I understand that hunger and that desire. And at the same time, we're in a bit of a moment, we being the bigger tech, industry, where those opportunities are not as available. And I also now know what it is to sit in a seat at a company where let's say you are in, 100-person company. You have how many manager spots? I mean, 30 at the most, and even that ratio feels, maybe not great, right? And so if everyone is coming in and saying, hey, within a year or two, I want to be a manager, and every manager is saying within a year or two, I want to be a director, you can't hold that unless you are a really rapidly growing company where new spots are being created all the time because your headcount is growing all the time. And if your headcount isn't growing all the time, you can't support it, or you get yourself as the leader into trouble with an organization that's not really supported and maybe cost too much, and then you're looking at downsizing later, which is kind of tragic. And I think a lot of us have gone through it. It's not fun. So I have tried to be extremely thoughtful and really diligent about my org chart and where I need certain roles. And that can lead to some harder conversations up front, which is better than harder conversations later. Meaning, what you really don't want is people who are over promoted and they still want more, but you really can't handle it. And then you do an exercise with finance, and finance says, why are you paying them this much? And then you have trouble. So I try to be really as upfront as possible, beforehand, these are your goals and these are, possible ways to get there. I'd love to help you, but, at some point it might be here or elsewhere. And so I actually try to be really open about that. I think that's unusual. I think a lot of people are let's all pretend you're going to be at this one company for your whole life, even though that's not the world we live in. I try to be more realistic. I try to say, I think you're fantastic. Let's say you're a manager. I want to get you to that skill set of being a director, and I'm going to help you get there, whether we have an opening or not. And if at the end of a year or two, you're doing so fantastic, but I just don't have that opening, I'll help you find your next job. And that's okay, and I think that has to come out of a place of mutual respect and care, that it's okay if the next best thing for you isn't here. I'd rather do that than over promote to try to keep you, but maybe you get the title then, but you don't actually get the responsibility. That doesn't help you later because eventually you will try to leave. You won't have the experience. So that's just a little bit of I think what a lot of leaders are dealing with. And I try to be as kind of how can we make this a win-win for each other for as long as possible? And when we hit that point where it's not going to work, I care enough about you and I want a great alumni network because, again, I have benefited from that. go off and do something great. And maybe you'll come back around in a few years, or, maybe you'll do so great that it will show other new people who I'm trying to hire, like, that I'm a leader who cares and will train you up. So that's a little bit how I think about that side of things.
I love that concept. It's really striking for me because there's this real long-term thinking that's in there, right? So for the example, it's like you're going to not give someone a title without the responsibility, because that's going to make it harder at one time, when they do go off and do something else, they don't have the responsibility and they're kind of over-titled. They're also over-titled within the organization. And and the fact that you really care about the alumni network and sort of, that sort of NPS of you as a leader in the company. I'm really struck by that. And that's fantastic. And I would love to maybe get your thoughts on how do you bring that with you to the rest of the organization? How do you have your executives and your teams in that same sort of, high standards, long-term thinking mentality when it comes to people? Because, annual reviews, calibrations, performance reviews, these are all very difficult things. Not everyone's at that same level. How do you bring a whole organization of leaders up? And I'm asking, selfishly, because as we record this, end of year time and performance review time. So I'm kind of curious, how do you take those values that you have as a leader and bring them to your leadership team and to all people managers?
It's a great question. I think for me, I would love to actually think about how I can do that more purposeful, almost like training my team, how they can feel, think with that same way on their team. I think what has happened over time is that they've, seen me talk through this and even like experienced it for themselves, how I speak to them and how I coach them and how I help them think about their teams. And then I hope they then take it down and, kind of bring it in and feel it and infuse it and do it going forward. I wish I could say I had developed a really good training for it, but the biggest thing I can say is that one, I always try to start from a place of care about the person. And so it is that balance. And this is what I try to teach. It's a balance of like, I care about you as a person, and I have a business need that I need to abide by. And so understanding the business need and like kind of taking the names and faces away and just thinking structurally about, what is the org chart that you as a company, need right now. And I'm horrible at sports and sports analogies, but like, I don't know if you were a baseball team, like maybe you do, but you don't need two pitchers or whatever. I don't know. But it's like, we only need what the team needs what they need. And so there's a little bit of that. And then how much do I care about you? Which is a lot. Like most managers actually really care about their people. I know it's not always true, but my experience has been more that they overcare and that they're a little bit over, like they'll over promote, typically because they are trying, trying to be nice and all of that. So let's balance the two. Let's like keep what's kind of fact. And then I care so much. Here's how I can help get you there. The other thing is like giving really good, meaty feedback. I mean, we're talking about year-end performance reviews. I think people tend to shy away from giving feedback because it can be awkward or uncomfortable. I think one of the best lessons I've ever learned as a manager is like to give it and just kind of get yourself to do it. Say the thing maybe you as the manager feel awkward saying, but I've only ever gotten appreciation from that. Anytime I've done that and I've had the hard conversation, someone has called me back a week or 2 weeks or a year later. I just got a call like last week from someone who said, I'm thinking about your performance review last year and it's like resonated with me and they don't work with me anymore and like it's helped them. So like give them meaty feedback, help them get there, but don't bend the structure that you have, that like that's your job. That's part of you. That's what you're paid for, right? It's like to do the right thing for the business also. So I try to infuse that. And I think people kind of get through the uncomfortableness of it a little bit and then realize it works and why it's successful. And again, these things sort of they boomerang back around. So like 1 year later, you're going to have someone who did leave. Like they did get a great job. I had someone who was a director and then she got a job as like a chief growth officer. And I was like, I can't match that. Like that's a phenomenal role and job and you should go, and a person like that, they're going to refer people back and they're going to cheerlead from the sides and it helps the company. So I think the proof is in the pudding, and like once you've kind of experienced it, like you'll keep doing it. So that's how I try to infuse, and I try to be like as transparent about it as I can as well. Like, why am I thinking this, and what are the constraints?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think the feedback is something that is such a practice. Like at Mattermost, one of our core values is self-awareness. So we try to practice that and do regular feedback, quarterly offsites, and feedback among the executive team. So we build that practice and sort of flow it down. At the same time, I'm kind of curious if you have sort of pattern recognition when it comes to, hey, annual reviews or performance. And, I think one thing you talked about was, hey, is this person wanting to get that next level, maybe the title without the responsibility? That's kind of a pattern. And I think there's other patterns where people are ready for that next level of responsibility, but they don't step up and they kind of become nudged and they're not asking to be promoted. And then when you actually promote them, They're sort of like, they've got imposter syndrome and things like that. Are there patterns that you see across performance, and what are the patterns? I'm most curious about the patterns that you kind of learned about. Like maybe early days you're managing people, there's some regular patterns, but maybe there's a pattern that you don't see until you're sort of like further along as a manager in your journey. Are there, what have you learned about the patterns performance, whether it's someone that's over their skis or someone that's maybe not needs a little nudge and confidence to puff up a bit? Like what are some of the patterns you see, and what are the latest ones, and what are the ones that other managers might miss that you kind of notice?
Mm-hmm. Great question. Yeah, I think when it comes to like recognizing these patterns, it's a good point. You sort of see a couple of these things over and over. And I think a common one you mentioned, I've definitely seen, is the person who needs the nudge. I have a couple of people that I can think of like that. Those are my favorite because I know I can kind of get them there. And it's so rewarding. Again, those are the ones that call you later and say, hey, I never thought I would be, more than a certain title, and like, look at me 3 years later and now I'm a VP, and you're the first person who told me you thought I could do that. And like, that's the best when you see the potential in someone and they don't yet see it in themselves, and you can help get them there. Not everyone, some people you encourage and encourage and encourage, and they have to do it themselves. I mean, that's one of those things where, and that like the flip side of that is like one of the saddest ones for me, when I see someone and I'm like, I know you can get there, and I'm encouraging, not, through all different tactics and strategies. And ultimately, like, they have to believe it, and they have to take that like little bit of risk to see it themselves. So that's certainly one. Another one I see that, I've seen many times over, and I'm curious if it resonates with you, is, basically like someone who will be in a role and they're doing really well, but they get sick of that role. And then they ask to do some other thing they find interesting, but it's not necessarily a job the company needs, or it's not necessarily even like a role that exists elsewhere. So I call that like the hobby role. And I think that's really dangerous. And I've seen this at every company I've been at actually has had someone where it was like they were a high performer. Let's say they are like an account manager, and they're like, I don't want to be an account manager. I only want to like, help the most interesting strategic accounts, make me like a strategy consultant. And it's like, that's cool. You could see in the moment why someone would say to themselves, well, I'm going to lose them otherwise. They're so good, I'll give them this role. But it's not good on either side. Like, it's not a role you would rehire were that person to leave. That's a key indicator that it's not, the right structure that you would build if you built it blind. And that person can't get another job because like they have a weird title. It doesn't exist elsewhere. They don't know how to explain it. And now they're stuck too. So I try really hard to avoid that. And again, I think that comes with people who are good at the company, and nobody wants to face the hard fact that maybe they need to leave to move on. So that's one I've seen. There's all sorts of things that you start to see. I think there are like people who really just want to solve all the problems themselves, so they don't tell their manager anything, and they're like, don't micromanage me. But then that can obviously be hard because they're maybe hiding problems. I always feel like giving bad news first is the best way to, handle that, and not try to kind of like hide. I think another thing that has been really interesting, for us being such a mission-driven company, is kind of like this balance of how do I think about furthering the mission and caring deeply about the mission versus furthering the fact that we're a for-profit company and we have to think about revenue. And that happens a lot in product teams. I think you might, see like a lot of product teams are like, I'm here to protect the user experience, and and my KPIs shouldn't be revenue. And then you sometimes get into a tough conflict of like, how do you know that you're really doing hopefully those things go hand in hand, because a great user experience leads to more revenue, but does it always? And are we spending time on the right thing? So I don't know, those are some of the different conflicts or profiles you'll see, or that I've seen that, I've maybe learned different strategies for each one, how to work on and how to help improve.
Yeah, definitely see all those patterns. Completely agree. And yeah, and it's and there's much more out there. I think those are some really good archetypes. I'm kind of curious about maybe a different type of archetype question, which is around sort of like leadership styles. And I'll give you, and I'm just kind of curious, like, you want a leadership team where it's kind of like everyone gets to be their best, but not everyone has the same skill set. And the one that I see sometimes is that there's some people who are really quick on thinking on their feet, and there's some people who need a little time. And there's people, because like when you're CEO, you're like spread across everything, and you actually need to be really quick because like you gotta keep going. And I find that some people can keep up, and then some people, they need a little bit of time. But the key difference is some people that need time, they're very comfortable with that. It's like, oh yeah, let me get back to you on that one. And they're like, fine. And some people are just really stressed out when they don't have an answer on the spot. And then you also have sort of introverts and extroverts. You have thinking fast and thinking slow. Do you notice that? Is that an issue for you, or does it feel like you have like? Do you feel like you can accommodate everyone, or do you feel like there's a certain culture that's where some folks might not be at their best all the time? Just kind of curious what you've seen.
I agree. I think that's really hard. I think that in some ways being remote and companies going remote has helped a little bit of the folks who want a little reaction time. Because when you're in the office in the room, it's true. There are some folks who just are fast, and also aggressive, right? Like, I don't know if you experienced this. Maybe in your past, but I think especially at larger companies, sometimes like there's literal not fights, but fights, right? Like you disagree on something. And I remember like I would see someone like kind of stand up and get big and puff out their chest and like this is what they wanted. And like physically bigger people like and bigger voices kind of got what they wanted more often, which is sort of unfair. So I think that being remote has evened that playing field a little bit for the folks who need a little bit of time to digest and to think through and to type out their response. At the same time, you don't want to slow down the pace of the company. And so there's a balance there. And I've definitely like had experience where some people want to be so thoughtful and methodical that they just don't get there. And like that doesn't work for me either, because we're trying to innovate and trying to move fast. And this is, what type of culture you're trying to become. So I think that it's good to give time for everyone and then maybe to know what that limit is and to like, start to coach through like, hey, we're not trying to get to perfect. We're, don't let perfect be the enemy of done or whatever. Because that will slow you down too. So I think that's challenging. And I think you have to kind of find your own culture and what you're like willing to kind of wait for, because a lot of great things happen when you do take that second beat. But you can't wait forever. You can't be, you can't kind of like allow for too slow, for no progress, for never getting something done.
No, it's funny. The way I translate that, I feel like, whether it's, I think people raising their voice or, getting physically big, it's like the physical version of writing in all caps. It's like,
yeah, exactly. It's like, I'm mad! Exclamation.
yeah. And it's, and people have it all, and it's funny because like when you translate to that, it's like, oh, it's the all caps moment. That's a big risk, right? Like, because it means people are also, just a little bit like, not like when someone's in all caps, it's either like, it's a big deal, right? So it's like, they're putting it all on the line.
Totally. Yeah. Whenever you're about to write in all caps, maybe like take a beat, go have a glass of water, think before you send, right?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. There's, so that I learned something today. There's another part of that, which is like sometimes, to your point, you got to make decisions, you got to move on. Not everyone's agreed, right? And people are making their best arguments, but there needs to be a decision. How do you think about, like, for me, even like as I was sort of building the company, you'd hire all these executives with lots of experience, and sometimes like it didn't make sense. I had to make a decision. Even me, it took me a little while to get accustomed. You need that 10,000 hours to actually make an override decision, because sometimes you have to override because, or you may either have to make a decision or you have to make an override decision. And for me, because we started the company, I mean, my co-founder, like sometimes we had to play the founder card. And it's funny, even at like public companies, I find that even at public companies, they play the founder card, and it's just like, it's just an extra thing you can do. So I'm kind of curious on the other end of that, being a first-time CEO, having a company that was founder-led in the past, for you to sort of, how was that for you to play the CEO card or to make a decision that was controversial or to override? Like what are you kind of, how did you approach it and what did you learn? I'm just kind of curious about how that was for you.
It's a really astute question. I think it took me a little bit of time to get comfortable. I would imagine even for you, the founder, and been doing it as long as you've been doing it, you almost never you hate doing that, right? You don't really like to pull that override, or it feels uncomfortable, or you can in some ways almost feel like, I don't know how you feel. When I end up doing it, I sometimes like take my own guilt. I feel like, what did I do wrong to get us to this point where now I have to do this, So I think really deeply about those kinds of things. At the same time, you have to do them. I would say coming in as a CEO non-founder, it probably just took a little bit longer. I was a little bit slower in the beginning. So what that might mean is I have a vibe. I'm feeling like this feels strange. I'm not sure about this. I don't think we should be doing it this way, but I'm a little too nervous to fully like put down the hammer because I'm new and everyone else has been here for a long time. And I'm assuming they're doing it this way for a reason. And there's probably something I don't know. And so I would say in the beginning, probably 6 months at least, I was slower than I would be now to make those kinds of decisions. And then just over time with comfort, you're like, yeah, my instinct was right. Now sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes you ask and ask and ask and you're like, okay, I guess that's why we do it. That's okay. But a lot of times I do think that your instinct is right. And I actually, like, I'm curious if you do this, but whenever I get someone new in, I try to encourage them to like keep their fresh eyes, meaning you see something that seems weird. Don't say to yourself, it's probably, I just don't understand it yet. Actually, like, ask those questions and call those things out, because a lot of times everyone agrees, like, yeah, that is weird. We agree. And maybe it shouldn't be that way, but we're used to it. And there's malaise or whatever, like inertia. And so we've just been doing it that way. But like a lot of times people coming in fresh see the issues often more clearly because they're like, no, other people don't do this. Why are you doing it that way? And so like, I think that you can be nervous and maybe it takes a little bit of more time and you worry, oh, there must be a reason, but actually fresh eyes are really, really good. And it helps to have new people come in and call those things out. So I always try to encourage new people, call it out and keep yourself fresh as long as possible. Cause 6 months, you'll lose it. Like you'll just, that's the way it's always been. And that's the worst. Like that's the way it's always been at a 10-year company, sometimes a 2-year company. You're like, come on, like it does not, we should never be saying that. Yeah. So I think it took me a little time. And then I would say, the other thing I did to just like give myself maybe like some leeway is stuff I had like suspicions about. So maybe we could get into something really specific. Came in, new CEO, and company has a really big long-term project they've been working on. They've been working on it for 2 years and they've poured a lot of money and effort into it. And I didn't think that, I won't get into details of why. I didn't think that we were going about solving this problem the right way. Good problem, meaty problem to solve, but maybe wrong solution. That's really tough to go in and say, ooh, I think I'm going to like pull the plug on this. And not only has like money been spent, but humans like engineers and people, like they've been working every day for a really long time on it and it's never going to see the light. Like that is tough, because you're going to have a morale backlash with something like that. So something like that, I then like maybe would bring in a consultant and someone third party to help me evaluate and really understand like if it's a really big thing before I fully make that kind of decision. I don't want to do that too hastily. So I think there's always like ways to kind of get yourself there, but I would say 9 times out of 10, the instinct is right. And that's why people are like going crazy over this founder mode thing. And, I think that, there's different extremes in all ways, but I think sometimes like you kind of do know what you need, when you have that feeling like I need to step in, if you're someone who's not like a step in everyday person and you get that feeling, you're probably right. And then you're probably just taking the time to like really make sure you're right. And you don't want to take too much time because you're probably right.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. That man, I've had that sort of like long-term project. You roll it forward or just stop it, and yeah, those are super hard decisions. And it's usually something that's happened in a function where I wasn't really, they're like, it's almost here, it's almost here. They're like, it is going to be another year or a year and a half. Yeah, it's like, and then it's such a sunk cost piece. For what it's worth, what I'm trying right now with my own executives for those challenges you have, I actually have them for the first month, 30 days, they're not supposed to make any decisions by default. And why that's important, and they just observe. And why that's important is because as soon as you start making decisions, you're condoning everything else, right? So it's like, yeah.
Totally.
So give them 30 days. And the other thing I have them do is, since it's a remote company, they shadow me in as close to 100% of my meetings as they can. So they get to see everything that I see, especially the cross-departmental things, so that when they see how I make decisions, they're like, oh, like, and it's like one person, a recently onboarded exec gave me feedback and she was like, oh, I see that you start with something like on Monday and you have all these meetings and by Friday you have a different opinion because of everything you learn. And she was there like learning everything with me. And I didn't even notice that. So it's really great to have someone who can watch me and have the perspective. And that's what I'm trying for onboarding. And kind of curious, maybe as one of the sort of final questions, if you can kind of go back and what sort of advice would you have for other people to onboard a CEO, having kind of gone a first-time CEO, kind of going through it? Like, how do you think about the board, the previous CEO, the management team? Like, if you could sort of do it again, what did you sort of like? What would you do differently? Or what would just be your advice to other people onboarding people into this very important role?
It's such a great question. It's something I've thought a lot about because I think that the CEO gets very little onboarding, and not, and that's not to say that's not a critique. I just think, as a CEO, you don't have a manager. You have a board, but you probably have a board, but you don't have a manager. And so, for example, as CEO yourself, Ian, like, do you get a performance review every year, or like, is it much less robust than when you were an employee, right? I'm assuming it's much, much less robust. And it's the same thing with onboarding. So when I came in, I had wonderful, my team, like I had a wonderful CFO who happened to have been interim for a little while, interim CEO. So he really was in charge of my onboarding, and he did a fantastic job. And the interview process is much more in depth than for another role. So like even through the interview process, I, was seeing a lot of financial statements and data and things like that. So I did learn a lot coming in, but you get onboarded, but not in everything. And you kind of like have to create your own onboarding. So I talked to a couple other people before I started, and then I asked, everyone director and above to present to me a little bit about, what's your role? What are your goals? Tell me about your team. So I was able to like learn about everyone. But it's funny that you should say it, because it's something I've thought a lot about. And I think that it's actually really something that the broader tech community, the VCs, the board, whoever it might be, could do a better job of. Because first-time CEOs or even incoming CEOs, they have to kind of figure it all out over time. And I do think that could be more structured and more processed. Maybe that will be my startup someday. I'll build that out. So, if anyone wants to talk about that, maybe we'll do it. But a lot of it was self-led, and a lot of it was learning on the job. Because it's just not something, there's no manager who's responsible for it. So it's a very different onboarding process.
Yeah, 100%. I've actually seen it before, so I'm just kind of curious. Maybe one last question. When you think back, I'm just kind of curious, any sort of like just parting advice, thought off the top of your head, something that you felt was impactful, or something someone shared with you, whether it's from your CEO role at Indiegogo, whether it's chief of staff or general manager at Groupon. Like, is there something that you think about as one piece of advice you really appreciated, or one thing that you learned through any of those experiences?
I like to quote A League of Their Own. Again, I'm really not a sports person, but this is the sports quote, which is like, the hard is what makes it great. And I think doing things that are hard are the most rewarding things. They are the things you learn from, and that you then look back on, and they end up being the things you talk about in your future interviews. So I think, like, especially for folks who maybe are naturally a little more reserved, or, kind of sit in that bucket, like you said, like they need the little nudge. I think really like taking the risk and doing something a little bit hard and a little bit out of your comfort zone is the best way to move forward. And maybe the best thing is just to have a great manager or mentor who will nudge you. And like, if you have someone who will nudge you, that's really someone who cares about you. And I think surrounding yourself with people like that can be very, very impactful.
That's amazing. Becky, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Ian. It's been so great to see you again and to talk.
Thanks so much for listening. If you like this content, please join our LinkedIn group. Please thumbs up, please comment, please subscribe. We'd love to bring more of this content to you.